The cabin seemed perfect when we booked it online. Charming, remote, and surrounded by the dense tranquility of the forest. My boyfriend Matt and I had been craving an escape from the city, and this seemed like the ideal weekend getaway. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just us, the trees, and the stars. The first night was blissful. We cooked dinner over a wood-burning stove, drank wine by the fire, and listened to the crickets singing outside. By the time we crawled into bed, I felt more relaxed than I had in months. But that feeling didn't last. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of faint creaking, soft, deliberate, like someone stepping on the porch. My pulse quickened as I stared at the darkened ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. The cabin was old, after all, and old wood groans, doesn't it? Then I heard it again. This time, it wasn't just creaking. It was footsteps. Slow, heavy, unmistakable footsteps moving back and forth across the wooden deck. I nudged Matt awake, my voice barely above a whisper. "Matt, someone's outside." He groaned, still half asleep, and mumbled something about deer or raccoons. But when the footsteps moved toward the front door, he sat up, suddenly alert. We both froze, listening. The footsteps stopped. Then came 3 distinct knocks, soft, almost polite, but somehow terrifying in their calmness. "Who's there?" Matt called out, his voice stronger than I expected. There was no answer, just silence, thick and suffocating. Grabbing the flashlight from the nightstand, Matt crept toward the door. I followed, my heart pounding in my ears. He hesitated, then flung the door open, shining the light onto the porch. It was empty. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. As Matt stepped outside to look around, I noticed something chilling, a single muddy footprint on the porch. It was large, barefoot, and pointed directly toward the door. "Let's go inside," I urged, pulling him back. We locked the door and sat in the living room, the flashlight resting on the coffee table between us. Neither of us slept. When dawn finally broke, I felt foolish for how scared I'd been. In the daylight, the woods seemed peaceful again, and I convinced myself it had just been an animal after all. But then we found the footprints. They were everywhere, circling the cabin, leading from the trees to the porch and back again. They weren't animal tracks. They were human, barefoot. Matt tried to stay calm, brushing it off as some local messing with us, but I could see the unease in his eyes. That night, we made sure every door and window was locked. We even pushed the couch in front of the door, just in case. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around midnight, the knocking started again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. "Go away," Matt shouted, his voice echoing through the cabin. The knocking stopped. For a moment, all we could hear was our own breathing. Then came the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate walking along the side of the cabin. Matt grabbed the flashlight and gestured for me to stay put. I wanted to argue, to beg him not to go, but the words caught in my throat. He opened the front door, stepping out onto the porch. "Whoever you are, get the hell out of here," he yelled. The woods swallowed his voice. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching as he shined the flashlight into the trees. Then I saw it. Movement. A figure just beyond the edge of the light. "Matt," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure stepped closer, and I finally got a clear look. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with tangled hair and sunken eyes. He was completely naked, his pale skin streaked with dirt. Matt raised the flashlight higher, and the man smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that sent chills down my spine. Without a word, the man turned and disappeared into the woods, moving so quickly and silently, it was as if he'd never been there at all. We didn't stay to find out if he'd come back. By dawn, we were packed and driving away, leaving the cabin and its eerie silence behind. But even now, I can't shake the memory of that smile, or the feeling that somewhere in those woods, he's still watching. The cabin was supposed to be our sanctuary, a quiet getaway from the noise of the city. My sister, Emily, and I hadn't spent much time together since I moved out last year. So when she suggested a weekend trip to the mountains, I jumped at the chance. The place was old, but county, tucked deep in the woods, with no cell service. A perfect escape, or so we thought. From the moment we stepped inside, something felt off. The air was heavy, and the faint smell of mildew lingered, despite the cabin's cleanliness. The layout was simple. One large room with a fireplace, a tiny kitchen, and two doors, one leading to the bedroom and the other to, well, we weren't sure. That door was locked. Probably just a storage closet, Emily said, shrugging it off. Still, I couldn't help but feel uneasy about it. The door was sturdy and painted an odd shade of green that didn't match the rest of the cabin. A heavy padlock hung from its latch, the kind you'd expect to see on a prison cell, not a county mountain retreat. That first night, we cooked dinner and played cards by the fire, laughing and catching up like old times. By the time we went to bed, the unease I'd felt about the locked door had faded, at least until I woke up. It was the sound that pulled me from sleep, a faint tapping, irregular, as if someone were lightly knocking from the other side of the green door. I frowned, my eyes darting to Emily's sleeping form in the bed across the room. "Emily," I hissed, my voice barely audible. She stirred, but didn't wake. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, I held my breath, straining to hear anything else. Then, just as I began to relax, it started again. Tap, tap. This time, it was louder. I got up slowly, my legs trembling as I tiptoed across the room. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. I stood in front of the locked door, my hand hovering over the padlock. "Hello," I whispered. No response. I leaned in closer, pressing my ear to the door. The wood felt cold against my skin. For a moment, there was silence. Then, from the other side, I heard it, a low, guttural whisper. "Let me out." I stumbled back, my heart racing. Emily bolted upright, startled by the noise. "What's going on?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. There's someone in there," I stammered, pointing at the door. Emily's face went pale. She grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and shined it at the door. The tapping had stopped, but now there was something else, a faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across the wood. "We're leaving," Emily said, her voice trembling. We hurried to pack our bags, but as we moved around the room, the scratching grew louder, more frantic. It sounded like whatever was on the other side of that door was clawing to get out. Then came the voice again, louder this time, filled with desperation. "Let me out." The doorknob rattled violently. Emily grabbed my arm. "We need to go now." We threw on our jackets and headed for the front door. Just as Emily turned the knob, a deafening bang echoed through the cabin. We spun around to see the green door shaking on its hinges as something slammed against it from the other side. "Don't leave me," the voice wailed, a horrifying mix of anger and anguish. We bolted. The icy night air hit my face. As we ran to the car, Emily fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking so badly it took her 3 tries to unlock the door. We jumped in, and she started the engine. As we sped down the winding mountain road, I glanced back at the cabin. In the glow of the headlights, I saw the green door swing open, slamming against the wall. A figure stepped out onto the porch. It was tall, impossibly thin, with long, twisted limbs and hollow eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. It stood there, watching us, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. We didn't stop until we were miles away. Later, I tried to find the cabin online, but the listing had disappeared. When I contacted the rental agency, they claimed they had no record of such a property. I don't know what was behind that door, and I don't want to, but sometimes, late at night, I hear it again. Tap, tap. And I wonder if whatever we left behind is still waiting for someone foolish enough to let it out. I always thought the idea of being watched was just paranoia. At least, I did until that weekend at the cabin. My girlfriend, Anna, had booked a trip, a surprise getaway deep in the mountains for our anniversary. The cabin looked picturesque in the photos. Rustic wood paneling, a stone fireplace, and surrounded by dense pines. It was everything we'd wanted. But when we arrived, something about the place didn't sit right. For starters, the windows seemed off. They weren't just large, they felt like eyes staring out into the forest, or worse, staring in. The glass was unnaturally reflective, as though the cabin itself was trying to watch us without giving away what lay inside. "This place is perfect," Anna said, already unpacking. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and for a while, I ignored the growing knot in my stomach. The first night was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. It felt as though the forest was holding its breath. As Anna slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams. My skin prickled with a distinct sensation of being observed. But every time I glanced at the windows, all I saw was my own warped reflection, staring back. Things escalated the next day. While Anna cooked breakfast, I decided to explore the property. I stepped outside and walked around the perimeter of the cabin. The back wall had no windows, just a smooth stretch of wood. Yet, as I stood there, I felt eyes on me again, coming from inside. I turned back toward the cabin, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw a shadow move across one of the front windows. "Anna," I called out, walking back inside. She was still in the kitchen, humming as she flipped pancakes. "Did you just walk past the window?" I asked. She frowned. "I've been here the whole time." "Why?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "Never mind." By the afternoon, the feeling of being watched became unbearable. Every reflective surface in the cabin seemed to shimmer unnaturally, distorting our images in ways that didn't make sense. The bathroom mirror stretched my reflection into a grotesque grin when I wasn't smiling. The windows, well, they were the worst. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the reflections in the windows grew darker and harder to ignore. I saw movement in them, shapes that didn't match our own. It felt like the cabin itself was alive, studying us, feeding on us. Anna tried to laugh it off, but I could tell she was uneasy too. "Maybe it's just our minds playing tricks," she said, pulling the curtains closed. "That was our mistake." Later that night, I woke to the sound of shuffling footsteps. At first, I thought it was Anna, but she was sound asleep beside me. The footsteps were soft but deliberate, pacing back and forth just outside the bedroom door. I nudged Anna awake, whispering, "Do you hear that?" Her eyes snapped open, and for a moment she frowned, listening. Then the sound stopped. "I'll check," I said, grabbing the flashlight from the nightstand. The hallway was empty, but the air was heavy, as if the cabin itself was breathing. I shone the flashlight toward the living room, and that's when I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the window. It wasn't outside. It was in the reflection. I frowned, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure was tall and featureless, its head tilting unnaturally, as if studying me. Slowly, it raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. I turned, expecting to see someone standing in the room, but there was nothing. "Anna," I yelled, rushing back to the bedroom. She was already standing by the window, her face pale. "They're everywhere," she whispered, pointing to the curtains. I followed her gaze and pulled the curtain back slightly. Dozens of figures crowded the reflections in the glass, their eyeless faces turned toward us. They weren't just in the windows anymore. They were in the mirrors, the television screen, even the glossy surface of the kitchen counter. We grabbed our bags and bolted. As we drove away, I looked back one last time. The cabin's windows glinted in the moonlight, and I swear I saw those figures watching us leave, their heads tilting in unison. We didn't stop until we were miles away, but the feeling of being watched hasn't left me. Even now, in the safety of my apartment, I avoid mirrors and reflective surfaces. Sometimes, late at night, I catch glimpses of them in the corner of my eye, waiting for me to slip up, to look too long. The cabin may have let us go, but its gaze never has.